This is Mercy Pilkington for GoodEreader.com at the Self-Published Book Expo in New York, talking to Michael Margolis, who is the president of Get Storied and the author of Believe Me, a storytelling manifesto for changemakers and innovators. Mr. Margolis appeared this morning on a panel at the Self-Published Book Expo, the panel being called The Smartest Things I Learned from Self-Publishing. So thank you for talking to us today. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the panel discussion you had this morning?
Yeah, really fun panel that was hosted by Jonathan Fine from Amazon, and actually part of the journey that I've been on with self-publishing was I self-published my book, which you mentioned, Believe Me, in 90 days from the first word on paper to having the book available for sale on Amazon. And the way that I did that was using a platform called CreateSpace, which is actually a subsidiary of Amazon. And we were sort of just sharing basically war stories about that journey and process. And one of the things, so there were a couple things that were big highlights from the panel, that we spoke to. One was really recognition that what I was able to do, and I self-published my book in October 2009, but what we're able to do in the last couple years, we couldn't be having this conversation 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And what has happened is the means of story production have been democratized. So it's a really exciting time for anybody who wants to be an author, or maybe you already are an author and you have more that you want to write and share, that you can get your stuff out in the world, and you can do it for pennies on the dollar. So part of what I shared also was some of my own story and how in the last 3 years I went from being a struggling consultant who I was going through a divorce, so I was really struggling. I lost everything in that process. And as I started over, I reinvented myself. I became a self-published author and a publisher and a podcaster and a journalist and a professor at a business school and a curator of an online conference, a fashion designer, even if you can believe that, and the dean of my own university called Story University. And so the journey for me in book publishing has been one that's been about really building a platform of which the book is really just the conversation starter. It's how I've drawn over 10,000 people into this tribe, and people who identify and resonate with this idea of storytelling and how do you tell your story, how do you connect with other people, whether that's as an individual expert or a thought leader, or as a brand and organization that's either doing something special and innovative in the world, or you're just trying to better communicate the value of what you do.
All throughout self-publishing, through the Self-Published Expo this morning, what I keep hearing is it's not quite a buzzword, because that kind of indicates that it's just a word people are throwing around. I really think this is a very serious, important word in the lives of digital publishing and the authors who choose to pursue that route. What about the tribe? I keep hearing that word this morning, that you have a tribe of readers that you need to reach. Tell me about who those people would be to an author.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, a lot of authors, self-published authors, you don't realize the whole process of writing a book is like birthing a baby, and it's this whole gestation process, and you go through all of this, and until finally the book comes out. Well, that's just the first half of the journey. You've now earned the right and the privilege to be at the starting line of a next marathon. And that next marathon is building your platform. And so it's in the context of building your platform that you need to think about this idea of tribe. Tribe is who else sees the world the way I see it. Or tribe is also who is going to identify with this story. And that's why it's actually really important. One of the things we talked about in the panel, and it's core to my work, one of the things I've created is a curriculum that teaches people how to talk about themselves, how to tell their own personal story in a way that is more relatable. See, we in many ways, as an author, as a speaker, as an expert of any kind, your perceived worth and value is directly linked to your story. And what I mean by story is, what's the journey that you've been on? Right? Because we've all been on some journey with twists and turns, and sometimes we feel like, well, geez, that last chapter was a failure, and I'm trying to run away from this thing, and a lot of parts of our own story are unreconciled. But the way to stand out as an author or as a speaker is by getting really clear about your own story journey, because it's that story journey that's going to allow people to identify and relate to who you are. It's this notion of character trumps credentials. People want to know your personality, like what makes you tick, how do you see the world, and what motivates you. And that actually, while that's about getting clear on your own personal story, that's foundational to gathering a tribe. See, because we used to think of our audience as customers, and well, we just need to find people who buy our book. But tribe is a way to think about that process in more relational terms. So the holy grail of storytelling, in fact, and this is something I describe in my book, is when you tell a story that people can identify with as their own. When people can see themselves in your story becomes my story. And the need to persuade, convince, or sell me on anything, it disappears. So that's the power of tribe. People are looking to be part of something larger than themselves. They're looking for finding voices and personalities that they identify with, where they go, yeah, wow, that kind of aligns with my values. That kind of aligns with my interests. There's a reason why we have favorite authors, because of their voice, the way they speak, or what they embody and represent sort of touches us at a deeper level. Great example for me is in the world of fiction is an author like Tom Robbins. Right, Tom Robbins is sort of this, sort of astral cowboy, who sort of has these crazy misadventure stories that embraces the divine feminine and synchronicity, and those are things that are totally part of my own personality, and he does this in a very irreverent, playful way. So there's a reason why that author really speaks deeply to me, and so or the work that I do in my own writing with my book. Specifically for change makers and innovators. My own backstory totally relates to this. My dad is an inventor. My mother's a teacher, artist, and toy designer. So I grew up in a world of infinite possibilities. But they didn't teach me how to fit in or belong anywhere. So throughout much of my life, I felt lost in translation. And that's what brought me to storytelling. And I've also seen a lot of other visionaries and change makers and creatives, people who have something really big and special to share with the world. Right? How do you go about getting your idea into larger mainstream cultural acceptance? That whole process is a process of finding your tribe. Okay, and that's the power of what you can now do with all these tools and self-publishing a book, that you can then, you need to think about who your audience is and write and bring your voice to the surface with that in mind. And it's critical. If you don't have a platform, whether you're going to a traditional publisher or you're self-publishing, you've got no audience. Right? And quite literally, the process of storytelling is to actually have your story witnessed by others. Because in the act of that story being witnessed, the meaning of that story gets passed along and your story travels.
Okay, that's wonderful. One last question before I let
Yeah.
you go. We had talked about the book Believe Me when
Yeah.
we had an interview earlier this summer. So what's in store next for your writing and your self-publishing?
Yeah, so I have a curriculum that's online called The New About Me that teaches people how to reinvent their bio as a story. It's thenewaboutme.com. So that's in an info product form. It's a series of 7 videos with worksheets and dozens of examples that walks people through the process. I'm now adapting that material into a storytelling toolkit that's going to be in a book form for folks. So there's that, and then the other thing, it's not quite in a book form, but part of the larger platform is called the Reinvention Summit, and it's the world's largest virtual conference on storytelling. We did our first one last year with 37 speakers, 500 participants, 33 hours of content, looking at the foundations of narrative and how you can apply it in branding and innovation and your own personal reinvention and community building. Really the foremost experts in storytelling from all these different vantage points, from psychology and spiritual development to business and brand and building and marketing. So that's coming up. That's going to be in February or March 2012, and that's a totally online. It's a virtual conference. If people are interested in any of these materials, you can go to getstoried.com. That's GETSTORIED, getstoried.com. You can download a free digital copy of my storytelling manifesto, and then from there you'll get on our email list and you'll hear about all these various different programs and opportunities, as well as we have lots of free content and resources that support people on their storytelling journey.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear. Again, we'll direct readers to getstoried.com. And thank you, Mr. Margolis, the author of Believe Me. And this is Mercy Pilkington at the Self-Published Book Expo.